This is the Troutbitten Podcast.
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten?
Troutbitten.
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 Yeah, Troutbitten.
Troutbitten.
It's about trout.
Wild trout. This is Troutbitten.
This is the Troutbitten Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Dominic Swantowski. I'm the owner of Troutbitten and the author of Troutbitten.com. All right, welcome back from our season intermission. We're here for episode 4 of our Troutbitten Dry Fly Skills series. This one is all about casting and mending. Hey, first, I want to quickly say thank you for all your support for the Troutbitten Leader Shop. Our summer sale started last Wednesday and things are moving faster than ever. Thanks. Also, sincere thanks for all the positivity surrounding the Fish and Film series. The first episode on our YouTube channel published on August 15th. I'm filming and editing this series myself, so the process was a little daunting, but the enthusiasm out there for what turned out to be a pretty good video makes me happy. Thanks, everybody. And here's Matt Grobe. How you doing, bud? Just get back from work?
Just got back from work. Had a good week fishing.
Mm-hmm.
I fished a lot this week because my wife and kids are out of town. So, I pushed the envelope, right? Running around, fishing after work, before work, doing late floats. It felt good.
Nice.
If I sound groggy, it's because I didn't get home till like 10 last night. I was floating the Yellowstone.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
How'd it go?
Good. It was, it's funny, the hopper bite out here, I was texting Dando, right? Because Dando's on he probably landed out here.
Yeah, he did. He did.
But we had a really dry fall and a dry spring, and that really hampers the grasshopper population.
Oh, poor guys.
Yeah. So it hasn't been a very good hopper bite. But anyway, they were on ants.
No kidding.
Smoking ants. Yep.
You stayed on dries the whole time?
Oh, the whole time.
I love it.
Yep. Hopper ant. Flip-flops, beer.
What is it, like every 10 fish you drink a beer?
No, it was just on the boat, man. Just drinking, rowing.
No rules. You got a cooler. Nobody's counting. Hey, who's counting?
Yeah, nobody's counting.
Nobody's counting fish. Nobody's counting beers.
And no one's on the river.
Why? Did somebody tell them that the water's not okay?
We talked about that a little on here. It's just everybody gets off the river 5 o'clock, man. They got dinner plans, and I get it. You guide, right?
Yeah.
Typical trips, it's work, right? And so anyway, what happens is in the evening, we call it the local shift.
That's right. Well, you found your way to find your space, right?
Local shift. That's what I do.
And you have your space in your house right now because your wife and kids are not there.
Yeah. Right? And I'm flying back tomorrow. Back
right
to Pittsburgh.
On. You got some packing to do.
Yeah.
You
know what my brother has for me? Troutbitten hazy.
Hey now,
waiting in the fridge.
Hazy IPA.
Let's do it. I'll be in Pittsburgh for 30 minutes and crack one. I'm excited.
I love it. Did he get a case or did he have
he just sent me a picture. He just had a 4-pack or something. I was like, he's like, I'll save you a couple. I'm like, you better.
Nice. It's getting hard to find.
Yeah. Well, he's in downtown Pittsburgh. He got it. That's pretty cool.
I love it.
Yeah.
It is. It is. You have to text me tomorrow.
I will.
What brings you back east in the first place?
Oh, just check-ins.
Family visits?
Check-ins with the grandparents and the uncles and the aunts and the cousins.
Right on.
Try to get in before school starts,
Oh,
yeah. Everybody. So
good stuff. Well, enjoy it, buddy.
Yep. Thanks.
All right, so back to this podcast series, Matt. Stop talking. Season 12. Here's where we've been and where we're going. Episode 1 was when and why we like to fish dry flies. Episode 2 was getting drag-free drifts or animation or you can do both. Episode 3 was dry fly leader design, and now we are to casting and mending and providing that slack, really. I think we're going to focus mostly on how to provide slack in the cast, and the reason we mend almost always is to provide slack. And, well, go back to the drag-free drifts or animation to understand why it's much harder to get drag-free drifts than it is, to get drifts where, you're trying to skip the fly around and almost drag it around a little bit. Although there's a real skill to animating the fly just a little bit, like we talked about. Next week, we'll talk all about the flies. That's episode 5. Episode 6 is going to be eats and refusals, rise, forms, and set speed. Matt's an expert on all that. And episode 7 is fishing with dry flies. Wait, what? Shouldn't that be episode 1? No. We're just going to try to bring it all together.
Now you're ready to fish.
That's right. Now we're ready to fish and we're going to go do it. And we're going to do that from Matt's boat. out in
Montana.
Yellowstone. We'll get Dando to come down.
Foot-fots.
All right, wouldn't that be cool?
That'll be
Someday.
amazing.
We'll get a big sponsor.
We'll get it going.
Fly me out there, get you a brand new boat. Get on your third boat.
That's a good. We should
Right?
get the Troutbitten wrap on it.
Nice,
I like that.
Nice. We'll take the label from the hazy IPA.
Uh-huh.
Somebody said they thought it was a camouflage label until they got it in their hands. It does kind of look like that from a distance. It kind of looks camo.
Yeah,
But when you get it in your hands, or you zoom in, you realize that Josh did an awesome job. It's a picture of a valley. It's the water.
Yeah?
It's the water. It's the water surface. It's the it's the mountains and the sky. It's super cool.
Cool.
Very detailed design. Love it.
Heck yeah.
All right, so let's jump in here, Matt. You guide, and you've been teaching or helping people learn to cast for a lot longer than that, too. Longer than you've been guiding. Probably pretty much as soon as you started learning, you're passing knowledge on. So you and I have acknowledged before, we think like the casting is really the hard part. It's probably the biggest barrier of entry for people. It's a little intimidating, I think, for a lot of people looking from a distance. It's the fly casting, and it is. I think it's the biggest obstacle for anglers. You think so?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think it's definitely the folks I see and spend time with, it's definitely an obstacle. I like how you phrase that. And, I think part of it has to do with, fly casting. It takes time.
Yeah.
I think that's the obstacle, right? It's not something you can just naturally master quick. I think you got to put time in, and I'm not even saying on the stream. You can cast in your backyard. You can get the motions down. You can put a little extra effort in, but if you just show up on the stream, and go at it right without any practice or forethought, I think you struggle. So it's just like anything else. The more effort you put in it, the better you get, and I think there's probably a lack of that.
Yeah. I think all fishing types are going to take some skill, but spin fishing, for example, or with a bait caster, gear fishing is arguably a lot easier, not to master, but to enter. Hey, that's why I started my kids on a spin caster. It's easier to learn spin casting than fly fishing. I think the biggest reason is because with fly fishing, you're doing something very different. Let's say you come from a spin fishing background, or a person comes from a spin fishing background, and you put a fly line in their hands. It's such a different stroke. So if they already have those habits of spin fishing, then they're trying to cast the weight of the lure, or in this case, they're going to be confused almost by, wait a second, I'm casting this. All the weight isn't in one place. It's spread throughout the length of the line that I have out. That's, I think, that's what makes it so different. And that's what makes it an obstacle for people. It's a little weird.
It is weird, but you probably have friends at golf. I have friends at golf. I don't golf much, but I think it's similar in that, like, you go out and golf a couple times a year. You're probably not gonna hit par, right? You're gonna be over par by X amount of strokes.
Yeah.
Casting similar, right? If you only go out a few times, you're gonna be a little sloppy. You're gonna be above that par mark. Most likely. I'm not saying everybody, right? But it's something you definitely have to work on to master.
All right, so I think it would be kind of silly if we would try to cover how to cast dry flies in a 20-minute discussion coming up. And so that's not our intention. It never is. But I will direct everyone over to Troutbitten, to the fly casting category on a website, because there are many good articles to help you out. I also recommend the Orvis Learning Center as my favorite resource for beginner's instruction. If you have no starting point, some of this might not make sense, right? But our goal here is to walk through some useful tips that reinforce those basics and then take things a little further. Because as always, Troutbitten focuses more on techniques that are, again, a bit further down the path. We're not really trying to cater to beginners or tell you how to do this from the ground up. We just said why we think, anyway, fly casting is a little bit more difficult for beginners than spin fishing. But again, the goal isn't really to teach you how to dry fly cast tonight. I want to just give you some tips that we think have been useful through the years, and then really talk about I think what we're probably going to do the most is how we're providing slack to that dry fly, which again is, I think, a little bit further down the line, because most people will be telling you, hey, straighten that leader out. Hey, to get accurate, you're going to need to be able to get full turnover. So we're going to assume that most people listening here already kind of have these basic dry fly casting skills. And now let's get a little bit more nuanced about it. So Matt, if the leader isn't properly designed and adjusted, even the best cast won't produce the right results. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, 100%. And we kind of elaborated on that with the leader design episode and how influential that is to the whole scheme of things, right? So if you don't have the right leader built, it's already a nuance to the process. So before you even pick up the rod to start casting, that's a big thing that everybody should do.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a good tip. It's a good habit to get into. Check the leader, make sure it's designed properly for the day.
Yeah. And throughout the day, as we said, you have to make the adjustment. Now, I think one of the hardest things for me to explain to people through the years has been what the adjustments are that need to be made. We addressed this a little bit last week about adjusting the tippet itself. You even talked a lot about how you play around with the midsection and the butt section. That's why we like hand-tied leaders, and we're not saying you have to use a hand-tied Harvey leader to have success. That's the way we like to do it, because I know a lot of us can just kind of feel what needs to be done. Hey, that midsection is just really flopping. It doesn't have enough power. I'm going to rebuild it. There are not a lot of times on the stream where I'm building the midsection, right? But then again, what I consider my tippet section isn't just my 5X. So I will change. I'm ready to rebuild 2X, 3X, 4X, and 5X, or 2X, 3X, or just 2, whatever my terminal tippet is. If I'm going down to 6, I'm saying when I refer to adjusting my tippet section, I don't just mean my terminal section. I mean, I'm going to adjust sometimes even the 2X, then the 3X, 4X, 5X. We think that's important.
We do. And, last night I mentioned, I was floating a favorite river, and it was going from size 8 heavy bugs to size 14 deer hair patterns. There was a ton of adjustment, right? That I was making throughout the day on the, you'd pull the boat down and I'd clip, retie, clip. And it's funny, the fellow I was with, a good friend of mine, Brian, within a minute, it was just me and him. He got in and starts casting my rig, and he's like, what kind of leader is this?
Is that right?
I'm not making that up.
No,
he's like, what is this? And he's a Penn State guy. I'm like, I'm like, it's a Harvey leader, man. And
is that right?
He's like, it feels good. I'm like, yeah.
Everybody says that.
He had been doing some, some store-bought stuff. And anyway, so I'm taking the time to get the confidence, and it gave him confidence in casting down, properly in the runs and riffles and pulls, and we had a good day. So leader, we can't harp enough how important that is.
Because you can feel like your casting is good, but then you're just not getting the results out there. And I guess that's my point. We need to talk about the casting here and how we're going to provide that slack to the dry fly within the cast, and then mending too. But again, man, if you don't have that leader design, not just a Harvey leader, but the ability, and I guess the understanding and experience to be able to adjust it, it's still not going to cast right. But the opposite's true too. You can have the perfectly built leader adjusted for the dry fly at the end. Right. And then if the casting stroke isn't right, you're in trouble.
The casting stroke.
Yeah.
Right? The simple tip on the casting stroke, be interested to hear what you say.
Yeah.
But you hear it all the time, right? The 10 and 2.
Yeah.
That is a core principle in when I teach casting, because I feel like another error folks make is they do that 10 and 2 motion a little too quick altogether, and they forget that nice hard stop right at 10. Just boom, come to a hard stop, let that rod do the work. Let that line and the leader we built do the work. And so that's, to me, is a core fundamental and a tip that probably most of us need a reminder of when we're out there, to slow it down a little bit and work in that 10 to 2 range.
For me, it's 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock. And then there's acceleration between those 2 points. And for me, I don't think that part can be too fast. Accelerate as fast as you want between 10 and 2. But then, like you said, the stop needs to be there. And then there's going to be a pause. And then that pause can seem like it's pretty long, especially if you were going fast between 10 and 2. The longer I guide, I think the more I am able to just kind of simplify what good casting is. And I tell people all the time, 10 and 2, think of 11 and 1, and you'll probably end up at 10 and 2. Watch your cast. This is one of my best tips. Watch your loop up there. Just watch your loops. Now, that's when you're learning. And I'm saying learn to false cast up in the air. That's the value of false casting for me, is getting the timing of the rod, because every rod's a little different, and then getting the timing necessary or the pause necessary at those hard stops. After those hard stops, there's a pause, as you said. But that timing is going to be different if you have 30 feet of line out versus if you have 20 feet of line out, or if you have 40 feet of line out versus 20 feet. That pause is going to be a lot longer, so that turnover can happen. And then you're going to see it. You're going to see that loop start to really pull on the fly rod. You're going to feel it, and then you go forward. You go to 2 o'clock and then stop there and then wait for a second. It's probably not a full second, but there's a timing, and you can see it in the air. And I recommend to people all the time, don't even start to present that fly until you can get that parallel loop up in the air. 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock, crisp stops, crisp, hard stops, and then a nice pause, like you pointed out. That's the baseline. And if you can see it in the air, if you can keep that loop parallel to the water, then you're going to have great casts, great baseline casts. And then, the leader design and all that stuff's going to come together. That's when you false cast.
Sure.
I've had people tell me, I thought you weren't supposed to false cast, though, because, it'll spook the fish or it's useless because, there are no flying fish in Montana, brother.
Yeah.
Like, why am I false cast? I'm like, because, we need to work on the cast. The cast sucks. So
sure,
work on the cast and see it. I feel like it's that simple.
Mm-hmm.
The landscape is changing for trout anglers. No doubt you've already noticed another truck at your favorite access point and seen more anglers on the water. For those looking for new challenges and fishing opportunities, Trout Routes has the data to help you avoid the crowds and explore new public water. Trout Routes has mapped more than 50,000 trout streams across the country with curated, detailed maps of public land and access points. Trout Routes has developed integrated and interactive data, putting the tools in your hands to research new water and help you navigate in the wild to know exactly where you stand in the current. It's still up to you to find those deep pools and undercuts, but Trout Routes helps you get on the water, connecting you with resources like fly shops and stream gauges for trout water across the country. Download Trout Routes in the App Store today. Then use the code Troutbitten for 20% off your membership at maps.troutroutes.com.
Whether it's after a fishing trip or at a backyard fire, you can bet the Troutbitten crew has a case of New Trail Broken Heels along with us. It's honestly our favorite beer. This hazy IPA is smooth and full-bodied. Hand-selected Citra hops lead to notes of bright clementine and juicy ruby red grapefruit. Broken Heels is a keeper. New Trail beer is proudly brewed in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and delivered cold to your favorite craft beer retailer every week. At New Trail, it's not about being the best angler. It's about getting out there. So enjoy nature's moments and reward yourself for a day well fished with New Trail Broken Heels. It's Troutbitten's favorite beer.
One thing I'll add, when you're out there working on this stuff, right? Because it's kind of what we recommend. Because when you're trying to put all this together, right? It's a lot. Drifts, mends, casts. Like take a deep breath. Try to work on just the casts. One day, and when you're doing it, be mindful of your surroundings. Take an opportunity to get a fish upstream in the middle of the river where there's no obstructions on the back cast. Because I've often seen folks jump right into the small stream setting or even a middle level stream width wise, and they're hung up in trees and all those things. You don't want to frustrate yourself, right? So just be mindful of where you're starting and give yourself the best trajectory of success, right? And that's a nice clean back casting zone.
I would say everything comes from the baseline. That 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock, basically that happens perpendicular with the water surface, right? You end up getting this almost vertical drop down of the fly line. That's your baseline. And then we just take the rod, or just take the hand, and then the rod goes, 45 degrees to the side. So you can kind of do a sidearm cast. And that's how you eventually get what I call a lagging curve. We talked about that a little bit. That's a fantastic way to get this underpowered curve cast, which provides slack to the dry fly. But it's just the 10 and 2 stroke, just laid down a little bit. Then you can lay it down almost extreme and get under some branches. You can get under branches in a bunch of different ways, but that's a good way. If you want to have an overpowered curve cast, again, you're laying it down and then probably building the leader a little different and getting this powerful curve. All of the casts, go Google almost any cast and watch a video. Almost all of them with a fly casting stroke are built from that baseline of 10 and 2. And that 10 and 2 stroke maybe becomes a little tighter, 11 and 1. But then again, it
I like that.
Slants down, it angles down until maybe you're almost parallel with the water.
On your knees.
Perpendicular to it. Yes,
right?
all of that
You're
stuff.
doing all kinds of things.
Right. Another thing is that it happens at the tip, the rod tip. The performance of the cast happens with the rod tip. I do something I call a wrist roll. I was filming the other day, and I was happy that I was kind of able to see it with the GoPro, with the action cam. I was able to kind of see what was happening. And I do what I call a wrist roll, and it almost takes the fly line. It kind of corkscrews, and it's coming in this way, and then it just flips the other way. That corkscrew cast, that wrist roll, happens with the 10 and 2 stroke, and it goes from my hand through the rod, but then to the rod tip, which of course, with enough power, is going to direct that fly line and then the leader and then the fly.
Pretty neat.
To do the same thing. And it all starts with the crisp stops, acceleration. Yep. It's got to be powerful. That part, that fly line or that fly rod needs to work for you. And you said it earlier, let the fly rod do the work. That's where good fly casting happens too. I've had people tell me, oh man, my shoulder hurts when I cast a lot. I'm like, well, then you're casting wrong. Unless you're in the salt water or whatever, unless you're really trying to bang long casts out there, your elbow should be in. For most trout fishing, elbow in.
Oh, for sure. And with that, there's a body position, that athletic position, square yourself to the target type thing. You can kind of help yourself out by taking a moment, get sturdy footing. Sometimes you see guys walking around, and that takes a while. We do it. I walk around and cast and while I'm walking, but I would say a lot of times when I do that, I'm often sloppy. With my presentation, and I got ahead of myself. So sometimes it's nice to take a deep breath, get your feet sturdy, and then focus on the cast at hand.
Yeah, all the advanced stuff, let's say, I always hate to use the word advanced with fishing, but we all know what I mean.
Experienced.
All the experienced stuff, all the kind of fancy stuff you're able to do with the casting, it all comes from those good basic habits. And then I do feel like most of, let's say, the fancy stuff is going to come intuitively. It really does. You start to go, look what did I do there? Oh, look what I just did. You get that little corkscrew thing. You do it once and you go, oh, wow, that's possible. Look what I just did.
Sure.
And it just comes from goofing around. Can I say one more thing here about, we talked about the timing, the pauses. And I do think that is one of the most important things. I see the same thing as you. Many people want to rush that. I referenced the movie, A River Runs Through It, a minute ago. No flying fish in Montana. The other one is, how the dad has the metronome? How the dad has the metronome and has the kids cast into the metronome. I think it's a little silly.
Yeah.
The metronome set for a 30-foot line, okay. And a certain rod, okay. But as soon as you let, again, like 5 feet out, that timing is going to change. There is no certain timing. And I've had people often be confused by that. They think there's a certain time
variable
to make a good fly cast. There's not. It's fly rods.
It's variable. If the weight rod, right? The length of your cast, the length of your leader, all that stuff will influence the timing of things, right? And the velocity and the sharpness of the stroke. Yeah. There's so many variables there. I would never put a timeline on it for anyone.
For sure. Just explore through these things. Again, I hate to just kind of walk away from the fly casting section here. I feel like it deserves a lot more time. But I have written about it a lot. I know we'll do a full video series on it a lot. I would say I used to take fly casting for granted until I started guiding, and then I went, ooh, okay, it really is the heart of everything. If you can't cast, I'm sorry, but you're not going to be able to fish well. You can be the best at reading water and figuring out what trout want to eat. Well, but if you can't cast, then you're not going to figure out what trout really want to eat for the day. Let's move on to mending then, bud.
Let's do it.
I never mend. I'm just kidding. I mend a lot more now than I used to. I got better at it.
Yeah.
I used to really suck at mending.
Man, I used to mend a ton on with the indicator fishing on nymphs. This is dry fly fishing, but some of that translated into some interesting mends I'd do for a dry fly. They'd kind of cross. They'd work both ways, so to say. And it was always the I think you call it walking the dog, maybe just letting some line out, right? A little bit with to get a longer indicator drift.
Sure.
And I do that a lot with
Below
dry
you.
fly fishing at times as well.
Feeding it.
Yeah, but I also would say it's, sometimes that creates habits, bad habits. The mending, we're going to get into all kinds of mending tips, but I'll add it to the end sometime. Yeah.
I seriously used to mend a lot less because I didn't quite understand it. I'd say 8 or 10 years ago, I finally started thinking about it more, really analyzing things. Now, again, I have that action cam on a lot because I've been filming so much. And as I'm editing back through some of this footage, I'm like, man, I mend a lot. And I do a lot of things that are almost a pre-mend. I'm like, well, I'll mend now so that the line doesn't get stuck to the surface and I have to mend more. Or when I, mend earlier instead of waiting, 2 small mends instead of 1 big one, because it usually is more effective. Mm-hmm. So I prefer to really achieve most of the slack in the cast. And we were talking about 10 and 2. I tend to call this a stop and drop, where you stop the rod now at 2 o'clock, and then you go ahead and drop it. So the fly goes all the way out there, kind of shocks back, or the leader and the fly kind of shock back, and at the same time, you're dropping the tip. So you build up slack, and let's call it S-curves on the water. That's kind of your baseline, your standard, your perfect way to do it. I addressed how you drop that rod down to the side, 45-degree angle maybe to the side, and get this great leader build, and you get that lagging curve. Another way that in the cast, I have provided slack to the dry. Really, that's my preferred way to do it. But lots of times, we can get an even better drift or extend the drift then by feeding even more slack to the dry fly through a mend. And really, that's the purpose of the mend. You just talked about doing it with an indicator and a nymph. Same thing. You're trying to feed slack or grace to the indicator so that it's not being dragged around by line, laying on the water, and pulling in an odd direction. So once the fly and the leader and the line is on the water, we really can improve or lengthen that drift with good mending. Again, for years, I struggled because my mends were not good. There were some fundamental things that we'll talk about here that I just did not understand. And so mending was pretty tough for me. So a lot of times I would just avoid it. In a way, I think that was almost good, Matt, because I learned to do so much more in the air, kind of aerial mends or little minor adjustments, sometimes major adjustments in the air, so things would land almost pre-mended. And
right.
I kind of love that I learned that because I didn't rely on mending. And now I kind of combine the two things, because usually I'll lay it on the water nicely and then I can get really long drifts, because if you start with a drag-free drift, if you start with some slack, now you have some slack to mend. And that's one of the things you really need for a good mend. It needs to start with slack. If you start with a straight leader and then try to mend it, you're just going to be dragging the fly around.
Yeah. And boy, is that tough. I think it's one of the toughest things to learn and master in fly fishing.
Yeah, both these things.
Because there's a happy medium with the mending. And I think I see, we're lucky enough to be able to be on the water a lot and get to see a lot of stuff, not just through our own eyes, but other anglers. And there's always something that's, a talking point on a lot of my trips is when to mend. How often do we mend? And you were just talking about building the mend in the line, and I like that, or in the air. So you got aerial mends and on-water mends, right? Those are the two kind of mends you can do. Sure. The aerial mend really gives you that advantage. I would say it's much harder than the on-water mend, but when you get it, you buy yourself some time and you buy yourself a dead drift.
Yeah.
All right. So you don't have to, you might be mending a little bit of the line, but you're not moving that fly.
Yeah.
I think I often see people mend that fly a little too quick, right? I always say trout want to look at that bug for 3 or 4 seconds at least without moving. So if you're constantly mending the presentation by moving that fly too, that's detrimental to the success of your drifts, right? So it's important for me, a mending tips, just to be mindful. And I like what you said, if you can get into that, it builds some of that slack, some of that mending into the aerial part of your cast. I feel like you're on a path to success a little more often than the on water mend. And I'm not saying you can't catch fish on water. I just think some of us get a little bit too mend happy.
I feel like a mend that moves the fly is a failure. I feel like my goal is to mend and not move the fly. Mend and provide slack, I don't know, a few inches away from the fly.
It's a great tip.
You know, there you go. Because you talked about, I call it bumping the fly. This is important to point out. You just said last night you're on a boat. I know you've been on your boat a lot. Boy, mending is a lot different on a boat. And I'd say you can get away with that. Go ahead, throw kind of an aggressive mend. That's going to bump the fly, but it's going to have time to drift a lot
because the
longer.
boat helps it, right? The boat allows, almost mitigates some of the crappy mending that occurs. You can kind of get it into position and then keep rowing the boat to where it eliminates a lot of that mending.
Because everything's going the same speed. Yep. If you could wade as fast as the boat or as efficiently as the boat, you could do the same thing, right?
You'd be high-holing a lot of people.
I know. That's an idea, though.
Walking the dog downstream, just blowing past everybody on the river.
Yeah.
You got the longest drift on earth.
You need a special pair of waders. That would be something. But no, I mean, if anybody... Yeah, I think most listeners out there have been on a boat. You kind of understand what we're talking about. The boat's going the same speed as the fly line on the water, as the butt section that's on the water, as the tippet and the fly that's on the water. Now, I just talked about an ideal circumstance. Most times, if you're casting across or down, whatever, what angles you're casting at, there's usually some current that's going to cut through. And yeah, you need a mend. But I'm going to say that a boat gives you a little bit more forgiveness, sometimes a lot more forgiveness. Go ahead and mend. And that wasn't the perfect mend. It did bump the fly. The fly did move a little bit, but now everything's going the same speed again. And you know what? Here comes the next trout getting a good chance to look at.
Sure.
It's you get almost constant opportunities in a boat. And so if your mending is a little less perfect, you can get away with it. I'm not saying you don't need good skills on a boat. You certainly do. And there's certainly other challenges, other things that are even more challenging.
But I often ask my folks I'm out with, are you primarily fishing out of a boat? Or are you a wade guy, right? And so
that's a good question.
Because it gives you some backing, because it's a different approach, right? And I don't want to, you don't want to say it sets people up for bad habits on the with 2 feet on the ground, but it kind of does.
Yeah.
Right? Because you can, as a guide, really help that drift out personally by how you're rowing. And you can't do that in the water. You can only give advice on how to help, right? But it's ultimately up to the angler to do the best mend they can.
Yeah. I think mending is kind of often misunderstood. And I just want to highlight again that I think the perfect mend lifts line off the water, line leader off the water, and puts it somewhere else so that line won't affect or drag the dry fly. I think that's the basic idea of the mend. And you can mend for other reasons, but again, we're talking about dry flies here, where I can't really think of a circumstance where I'd mend and have it be a different goal. You're lifting the line off the water and putting it somewhere else. Again, the leader is what you're trying to mend. If mending just the fly line doesn't hardly do anything. The leader is what causes trouble. That's what the fly's attached to.
That's what the fly's attached to.
The leader, the tippet.
Yep.
That's right. Can't help that. Hey, do you grease your leader so that it mends better?
I don't.
Loser.
Should I be?
No, not necessarily, but I do. Hey, if you want to catch as many fish as me, man.
Remember, I harp on this all the time, that broken, choppy, riffly water, and I get away.
Oh, yeah.
I get away with some of that. So you're asking specifically now? No, but there was a time, targeting with lower flows, glassy water, all that's in play.
Yeah. Now, I don't always grease it, but I do quite a bit. And my main reason for greasing the leader is for better mending, for better pickup. Guys will tell you, oh, hey, if they might see that leader that's greased on top of the water. Well, they're not going to care. Even if they did see it, they're not going to care in a lot of the water that we're talking about fishing dry flies. But even the glassy stuff, imagine, all right, there's a downside both ways. They might see your greased leader. Although I should say this, I only grease it, let's say, to a foot away from the dry fly.
Okay.
So that last foot of tippet is not greased. And, if the fish does care about a greased leader and doesn't like it, he doesn't see it a foot away. But anyway, most of the leader, I usually do grease. And I'm talking about like a paillette paste or a mucilin, sometimes just gink or a quell, whatever. I think it benefits me because it allows me to pick up just cleaner. It allows me to mend cleaner. And if you are on a glassy flat and you go to do your next cast, and most of that leader is kind of, let's say it was on the water for a while, so it's kind of in the surface, maybe even some of that leader is now under the surface, and you go to pick it up, it kind of comes off the water.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and it's creating a disturbance then on the water.
Mm-hmm.
Now, wouldn't that spook fish too?
Yeah.
And that almost guaranteed spooks fish, whereas that leader floating over top of them may not.
Sure.
But lots of different ways to look at it. It's a nice little argument that I have with people many times.
I like it. I mean, it's definitely a added, like, why not, right? An added trick to give you an advantage. And that always usually benefits. When you're having to grease it, that means it's not easy, right? I mean, and that's good. You have to think that way.
Yeah. Since 2006, Yeti has been building products for anglers who fish hard and share an addiction for the woods and the water. Yeti changed the industry with their legendary coolers by featuring rugged but simple designs built to last for generations and stand up to whatever Mother Nature might bring. Yeti now takes that same functional and elegant design to everything in their lineup, from soft coolers to drinkware, bags, and more. The new Yeti Go Box gear cases have become my daily storage solution for a life on the water. Offered in 3 sizes, the Go Boxes are rugged and waterproof at home on a boat or in the back of a pickup. All Yeti Go Boxes offer smart storage solutions with removable cargo trays and dividers, and the Pack Attic is a set of zippered pockets conveniently housed in the interior lid of the 30 and 60 sizes. Lockable, light, and nearly indestructible. I use the 15 size Go Box for camera gear and the 30 size for organizing my reels, fly boxes, leaders, tippet, and everything else that keeps me fishing. The Yeti Loadout Go Boxes are the perfect angler's companion. For over a decade, Smith Creek has designed and built outstanding gear for the serious angler. Smith Creek's net holster is the perfect solution to hold your favorite net. I've been using mine every day on the water for over 9 years. Its ergonomic design helps you draw your net quickly when you need it, while keeping your net firmly in place and out of the way when you don't. Made from rugged materials and hand-assembled, Smith Creek's net holster is built to last. All Smith Creek gear is backed by their outstanding customer service no matter where or when you bought it. To stay up to date on their latest specials, follow Smith Creek on Instagram at SmithCreekNZ. Quality you can depend on from a brand you can trust. Smith Creek. So there are many different kinds of mends too. I mean, everybody knows about a reach mend and a stack mend. Are there other common ones, Matt, that are names people could look up?
Walking the dog. It's not walking the dog. I don't know if we made that up or not.
You're talking about like feed and slack, like downstream of it.
But even to extend my dry fly drift, I find that I'm mending. I'm giving out more line is what it is to extend the drift. Yeah. But it is kind of a mend.
It is. Oh, for sure. Yeah. I have one I call a push mend. I'm kind of pushing the rod toward the fly and combining that with really what I call a hop mend. We did a video on the hop mend. You can find it over on the Troutbitten YouTube channel. It's just an up and over. It's just an arch up and over. But I hop it. Instead of this big arc, it's not a reach mend. It's not this big wide reach mend. It's just a little hop. Little hops. What I actually do is the rod just goes in an arch. Rod tip goes in an arch that's only like 12 inches tall, sometimes less, and not 2 feet tall. I mean, it's just a little hop, but it results in a nice little hop of the fly line and leader out there. And again, I said this earlier, I'd rather do 2 small hop mends rather than one big reach mend. Right. Because it just works better.
Would you say most folks are applying a reach mend in their casts?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree
with
that.
That's the standard top one. Guys will tell you cast and now mend. Not really.
Yeah, you can get people into trouble.
Yeah, I know. Again, I'd rather set it up in the air and then, if I need to, only if I need to, I'm going to throw a hop mend.
Right.
It has so much to do with the water that's in front of you and what angle you're fishing. You know, if you're fishing straight upstream, how are you going to mend? You're not. That's where I do the one I call a push mend. I said that. But if you're fishing almost straight upstream, your hope is then that when you do your stop and drop, then the S curves kind of all land in a very even current seam.
And then you're managing line with the left hand, almost bringing, to to eliminate slack that way. You're almost pulling line in through the rod or reel, right?
Right on. It always takes line maintenance.
Yep.
And we talk a lot about fishing upstream, and you mentioned it earlier. And I do. I work upstream when I'm fishing dries. When I nymph, we mention this all the time, staying within the golden ratio, which is mostly upstream, but then one rod length over. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I like fishing that way with a dry fly. But when I'm fishing dries is the one time where I'll really open, or is one of the times where I'll really open up my range, really way outside of that golden ratio. Sure. And I like the distance that, the extra distance we can effectively fish dries at, and the extra angles we can effectively fish dries at. And because we're in this mending section, and you're talking about walking the dog and feeding the line once the fly is down past you, like I don't do that with a nymph hardly ever. I'm rarely fishing the nymph beyond my position. Well, let's say on a tight line. But with the dries, it is fun. If you get good with these mends, it's fun to see almost how extremely long you can get these drifts. And you can do it by opening up your angles. I don't really care for fishing straight upstream with dries all that much. I like what I can do by casting off to an angle, let's just say 45 degrees up and across toward the bank, and then starting to play with the mends. And again, I set it up, though, with probably my lagging curve, which feeds slack upstream of the dry, and I just try to extend it. It's fun. It's a fun game.
And the lagging curve cast, like building that mend in, I'll pull it into my float last night again. And when you're floating, you have these quick targets, right? It's fast and furious. And that lagging curve mend, really sets you up. Like you don't necessarily, there are times when you have obstructions in the river and you're trying to fish boulder fields and small seams off of boulders that are close to the bank, and you build that, you have the lagging curve cast, build a little bit of slack in, and you're just looking for a 6-inch drift at that point.
Both times, right?
And then the boat's gone, and you're going to get blown up anyway. But I had a couple really cool eats last night on an ant that was just like that. It was just a lagging curve cast, building a little slack, and you're like, it doesn't. You don't have to make that drift super long, right? You just need to make it good enough for that 6-inch window, and boom, it's great to see that work. And it's a different way of fishing, but it's exciting.
It is exciting. In the kind of water you're talking about, I combine that lagging curve with, I call it a crash cast, where I'm just forcing everything down onto the water at the same time. I almost guarantee that's what you're doing. Yep. And you probably just call it something else.
Sure.
And it provides, like you said, like you'll get a 3-second, not even 3-second drift in like this 6 inches, but that's what that little backwater, possibly in that pocket behind that boulder, is doing. And if all that fish needs is that 2 seconds and that 6 inches to make a decision, and that's what they're waiting for, is for some bug to just slide out of that main current right into that little merger seam that's got that little swirl, and bang.
Boom. Yeah, it's fun.
And then I set the hook.
And then I say, oh shit, I missed it. I know.
I missed them.
Do you find when you're putting mending, when you're building that slack into the dry fly drift with different mends, aerial mends or whatnot, there's times where we build it a little too much slack into it, creating just not enough reaction time, right? There's too much slack. How often do we battle that?
For
right?
sure.
And that's a happy medium you got to deal with, right?
Yeah, because, Murphy's Law is that the biggest fish of your life is going to eat right as you start your mend.
Yep, right.
Right. And then as you're finishing that mend, you're going to be trying to set the hook and take out all the slack that you just put in there. You know what? That's a reason why I'd rather do 2 short mends or 2 small mends, rather than this big reach mend or something. Oh my gosh, I'm in the middle of it and he ate.
It makes sense.
If I just did a little one,
you're less slack, you're building.
Yeah, whatever keeps me in the most control of the whole system for as long as possible. That's what I like to do.
Yep.
I like to just build slack in through the cast and then just try to extend it.
I like it.
I wrote an article in the fly casting category of Troutbitten, 5 tips for better mending. Clever title, right, Matt? You like that?
I like that.
Very, very clever. And here are the 5 key tips. You can go read the article. I think it's a good one. You want to start with slack. I think we kind of addressed that here. But start with slack. Mends that start with a straight line are going to move the dry fly. You need to be able to start with slack, and we build that up in the cast itself. So start with slack. A good mend needs to be speedy, just like the cast. be as fast as you want between 10 and 2 within reason. And then with the mends, the only way that you're going to get that nice hop mend or other things like that push mend and other effective mends is to have speed in that rod tip. Another tip in that article is to mend the leader too. I don't know, a lot of people miss that. We said it. You're not just trying to mend the fly line. You're trying to mend the leader and the tippet all the way up to the dry fly, but ideally not even bump that dry. Another thing is you need to use your line hand, and you mentioned that, Matt. You have to use your line hand in combination with what you're doing with your rod hand and the rod tip up there to get a good mend. And you talked about walking a dog or feeding. We should call it feeding the dog because that's what you're doing is feeding line in there. That requires your line hand. And almost all good mending, if you really watch what your hands end up doing when you learn this, you go, oh, my left hand or my line hand's really working too. And the last tip in that article is to mend sooner and mend more. I'm not saying mend all the time, but if you plan on mending, then you don't want by the time you mend for all or a lot of that line to have kind of been suctioned into that water surface. That's the thing we're kind of fighting with the dry fly. A lot of times is surface tension.
That's it.
That's it. I just gave you all the expert tips.
You hit a home run on it.
Thank you. Anyway, anything else, Matt, before you go pack?
Before I go pack, I would just recommend to folks, right now we're getting towards that end of season, right? Where the dry fly bite, starts to get a little slower. Maybe not right now, but in the next few weeks. And to truly practice this stuff, I tell my buddies, leave the nymph box at home, right?
Oh, yeah.
Just go out with a box of dry flies. Next time you get 2 hours on the water, 4 hours, 6 hours, whatever it is, just fish dry flies.
Yeah.
With all the other distractions, we all know, like nymphing can get, it's like enticing, right? It's like, look at these juicy pulls. I want to drag a big stonefly underneath that, and I get that. But if you really want to work on these skills that we've presented tonight, you got to go out with just the dry fly box and work on it. Work on the game, work on the mends, work on the casting. Give it a couple outings of dedicated focus.
I'm really glad you said that. I hadn't thought about bringing this up. As soon as you add weight in any form, whether it's just a tiny split shot or even a 2 millimeter tungsten bead that weighs like 10 centigrams, everything changes. That weight is going to take your built-in slack. It's going to want to take it with it.
Yep.
And I'm not trying to say that you can't end up with great dead drifts, but it changes. Everything changes. I love your advice there. Just take dry flies. And then once you learn how to really do all the stuff we're talking about there and more, learn more than us, then you can adapt, your dry dropper game and you'll be deadly.
Yeah. And you need to, during that prime season, take the opportunity to, and this is the angler phases we always come back to, but, at some point, just take the opportunity to embrace the dry fly season, and just focus on it, right? It's Sometimes it's hard though. I mean, I've gone through it where maybe you get in your head, you're going to leave that big fish out there or leave the numbers out there. And that's not necessarily true.
No.
And right. I could tell you the bigger brag, in my opinion, is when you get numbers on dries and big fish on dries. That's much better accomplishment than the nymph and streamer big fish.
It's all fun, and you don't want to miss any of it.
Yep.
We love it. All right, there it is, casting and mending. So our discussion here was about casting dry flies, but that's where all the good casting starts anyway. With a dry fly, there's no weight at the end of the line to help you out. No split shot, no tungsten bead, conehead, or bobber. Refining the dry fly stroke really teaches us what the fly rod is built to do. 10 and 2, acceleration and crisp stops between 2 points. Pause and allow for turnover to happen. Feel the rod load and watch it all happen with the fly line in the air. Then once you have that timing, your baseline is set, and you can take that same stroke to any rod angle, punching the fly around and laying things out just how you want them with minor adjustments. So good mending is set up by good casting. Put the two together and you can feed slack to a dry fly for perfect drag-free drifts all day long. Having command over all of that is a lot of fun. All right, thanks for listening. We'll be back next week to talk about the dry flies themselves. See you then. So Matt, let's do this readout a little different. How about we alternate paragraphs?
Remember, The Troutbitten Project is a free resource for all anglers. The Troutbitten website hosts 1,000 articles with endless stories, commentaries, tactics, tips, and more. Find what you like through the top menu and through the search page. Navigate by way of the categories and tags, too.
Be sure to find the Troutbitten YouTube channel, now featuring the Troutbitten Tips series, the Fish and Film series, and the Troutbitten Fly Box, all in collaboration with Wilds Media.
Thank you for listening to the Troutbitten Podcast. Please give the show a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leave a comment, because that really helps.
Until next time, friends, fish hard, enjoy the day, and find your life on the water.
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten.
That nice hard stop, right, at 10, just boom, come to a hard stop.
I never mend.
Yeah. And boy, is that tough.
It kind of comes off the water.
You hit a home run on it.